All right, welcome everyone. We are experiencing some technical difficulties, but that won't stop us. We'll go ahead and begin our board work session for today, Tuesday, May the 7th. We have some exciting topics on our work session agenda, and we're going to start with our Student and Educator Engagement Division of the Office of Equity Affairs. I see Dr. Chavis, Dr. Janine Perry Campbell at staff. And I know we have some students here, and I believe some of the staff as well. So I will turn it over to you to begin whenever you're ready.
We'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, Chair Hegarty and the board members, as well as Dr. Taylor. We are here today. We're excited to present to you some updates and information as far as it relates to student and educator engagement through the Office of Equity Affairs. If you'll recall, we came to you last summer and said we would be presenting a series of sessions for you all to ensure and maintain that we have visibility not only with our Board of Education, but with our general public and with our staff across the district. So today is one of those days where we are going to offer you some more information, and we are excited to present that today. If you can go ahead and move today. Part of our work, and I wanted to remind you all of the different work streams that we have within the Office of Equity Affairs. So you'll see listed on this particular slide the different intersections and ways by which we do work, many of which are related to and connected to federal mandates and law, as well as local and state statutes. You've heard from Mr. Johnson with mentoring support, who is in the audience today with us. You've heard our work as far as it relates to the equity policy and the framework and the DEI assessment. You also heard from two of our members in December about historically underutilized businesses. So today we are excited to have Dr. Janine Perry Campbell and Mr. Chauncey Hatcher, who will give you some more updates on our student and educator engagement programs and initiatives. So I'll pass it over to you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We are so excited to be here, and we're even more excited to have our students with us as well today. So as Will mentioned, I'm Dr. Janine Perry Campbell. I'm the Director for Student and Educator Engagement.
And I am Chauncey Hatcher, Senior Administrator for Student and Educator Engagement. Excited to be with you guys today. Thank you for giving us the time. A couple of outcomes we really want to convey with you today. Just want to update you on what programs we run through our Office of Student and Educator Engagement. You'll get an opportunity to see how broad those programs are and how they affect every aspect of our county and our students and staff. And then you also have an opportunity to learn about our Ignite program. And so two of our students who are here today are part of that Ignite program. Their schools are, so you have a chance to hear firsthand from them about the work we're doing through Ignite. As always, as student and educator engagement, one of the things we focus on highly is our student impact. What does that look like? What programs can we put together? And which ways can we make sure that students are getting a positive impact from their time here in Wake County? All of our work is aligned with our framework and our strategic plan. Here you see 5 of the 10 equity-focused practices that we highlight. But in reality, we could put something on every single one of these through the work that we're doing. Not even just through our Ignite program, but so many of the other programs which you'll have a chance to see in a few minutes. So I have a question as you're sitting there, and this is rhetorical, but just study the pictures you see here on the screen. Think about what you see. And there are 4 pictures. Just think of what you see. She's so cute.
That's my baby.
I love the bundle of joy. But we're going to come back to this picture. And I want you to keep in mind whatever word came to your mind, whatever feelings you had, whatever you believe you experienced by watching this picture. We're going to come back to this in a minute. First thing we had as one of our major opportunities through student educator engagement was our American Indian poster project. And so you see that's displayed here. That was an opportunity for us to connect with the student Ben Cashwell. And really through my role as student engagement, meeting with him as part of the Sanderson Equity Team, he was able to convey that he really had a heart and a passion to show people that our American Indian students are still here. Despite the fact that they make up 0.2% of our student population, he wanted to devise a way that we could support him to help people understand more about their history and their culture and who they are. And so this was birthed out of conversations that we had in August and September about what we can do, who we can pull in and collaborate with. And then that was work that was done with him, meeting with our Indian Ed program. And they were great about just directing me towards other students who'd be available to help in, ways that we can collaborate on that. And this was their result, completely done. And you guys, many of you were there at the reception, done online between 2 students. And I think that is just the power of student impact when they're empowered and encouraged to really gain their leadership skills and to really go about what their dreams and desires are for their students. And then student equity teams, this is a big part of our jobs as well. We have an opportunity to go out and really meet with student equity teams, help people create student equity teams, as well as encourage them and give them tools and tips on how to get their teams performing in a way that really impacts the entire school. We are currently at 32 total student equity teams in our county right now. 14 high school, 8 middle school teams. And then I'm happy to announce that over the last year, we've actually had a 25% increase in those teams. 3 new high school and 3 new middle school teams have been formed. And I love that. That is a chance to impact over 7,000 students in those 6 buildings. That's a huge impact. And that really is the student impact we're looking for through our department.
All right, thank you, Chauncey. And so, as Chauncey mentioned, we want to impact our students district-wide. And we go beyond high school and middle school. Here are some elementary kiddos, and they are a part of Helping Hands, which Mr. Johnson is the program manager of. When we had our Black History program in February, and again, many of you were there, they served as ambassadors. So they were your little guys who walked you to your seat, handed out programs. And we were very excited about this because it was our first district Black History Month program. We were able to have over 200 Wake County Public School students participate. The biggest takeaway for me and for many of the students and for our team is that while this was a Black History program, the majority of our students that participated were African American, but we had a very diverse participation as well because African American history is everybody's history. And so we opened it up to any child in our district who wanted to perform, just to showcase the rich heritage that was displayed on this day. So this was at Southeast Raleigh High School. We were very intentional with selecting that school as well, and just to build capacity in that community. So it was very well attended, and we're excited about next year. We also work with the Office of Academics. And these are pictures from our trip to Washington, D.C. With academics, we were able to take the AP African American Studies students to the National Museum of African American History and Culture. This was very important because a part of their AP curriculum is to do an end-of-the-year project. And they have to do a digital project as well as an oral presentation. And so by them going to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, instead of them seeing artifacts in the textbook, they were able to see the exact same images in their textbook as their first source. So that was a primary source for them. And just to hear them making connections as we walked from the museum to the Martin Luther King monument, one student actually said, we learned about, I forgot what she learned about, but she learned about something. And she said, it was on these grounds. Are we on the mall? And so the teacher said, yes, we're on the mall. And the kids actually said, we learned about this. This happened in 1910. I think, yeah, it happened in 1910. And so they were excited. So to be in Washington, D.C. and to see actual places that they learned about in the textbook was priceless. And so we had 3 high schools, Garner, Heritage, and Broughton students who went. They were able to connect and collaborate among each other and build capacity. So these are just some pictures of those students. And now we're going to talk about Ignite. So Ignite is our student-led equity program. Ignite stands for Leading and Solving Student Barriers Through Equity. We received a grant from Learning for Justice that funded this program. And we have 5 high schools who currently participate: Apex, Enloe, Heritage, Sanderson, and Roseville. And so these schools were selected because we know they had operating student equity teams. They were tasked with solving an equity-focused problem that was in their locus of control. So as a student, what issues do you see that concern you that you can solve in the realm of being a student? This program engaged leadership and team building among the students. During the summer, we had a summer camp where all 5 schools came together with their advisor and an administrator, so they got to meet each other, collaborate amongst each other, build off each other, and learn different strategies. And what they learned, one thing was that some of the similar issues may happen in one area occur in other areas, so they were able to see some similarities. And then we had an enrichment experience. We were able to take the students to Greensboro, North Carolina. So we went to the International Civil Rights Museum, and we went to Guilford County College, Guilford County, and we were actually on remnants of the Underground Railroad. So that was so fascinating and exciting. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Chauncey for a big introduction.
Yes. Now I would like to introduce you to 2 of our students. They're going to come up. Our first one is Leah Chaduri. She is from Enloe High School. She will talk to you about her Ignite experience, her Ignite program. So at this time, I would like to welcome Leah.
Good afternoon, school board members and Dr. Taylor. I'd like to thank you all for everything that you do for public education, and I'd also like to thank Dr. Perry Campbell, Dr. Chavis, Mr. Hatcher, and the Office of Equity Affairs for inviting me here today. So my name is Leah Chaudhary, and I'm a junior at Enloe High School and also the Director of Communications of my school's Equity Council. Now, today I'm here to discuss our Equity Council Ignite project, Connection by Communication. As context, Enloe has increased its Spanish as a first language population by 20% in the 2023-2024 school year. But this has led to several communication barriers, resulting in a large dropout in chronic absence percentage in our Hispanic community. In fact, 70% of our dropouts from December 2023 were from our Hispanic students. Thus, our team wanted to improve our connection with Hispanic students and families by easing the communication barrier. So to help solve this problem, we took 3 steps. First, we surveyed students who speak another language. Second, we collaborated with our assistant principal over the ESL department. And finally, we connected our goal with the school improvement plan. Using this method, we were able to create a translation key and a professional development course as resources for staff to speak with our Hispanic students and families. Thank you. So we then presented this to our front office staff, and these projects had several impacts. First, it increased the access of the comfort level of our school staff to communicate with Hispanic families. Second, our student team learned about the importance of language helping people feel connected and valued at our school community. And finally, for me personally, this project meant a lot to me as the granddaughter of immigrants. My mom moved to this country when she was 8 years old, and she told me that for my grandma, when she was visiting a school in a new country, that was always a very scary experience. But if she had the comfort of knowing that the front office staff could help communicate in her language, that would have made things much easier. Thank you.
And next, we have an opportunity to hear from Allison Howard. Now, I love Allison, and I hate to admit it, but I was actually her middle school counselor. So I'm extremely happy for her to come on up and share with us about the great work they're doing at Apex High School.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, board. Good afternoon. Okay, so my name is Allison. I am the president of our Equity Club at Apex High School, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our project for this year, which is our 23-24 Apex High School Equity Initiative. So our main issues from this year that we wanted to tackle were the racial disparity of our student body in AP courses and also the transparency of WATE Tech courses.
Sometime, Allison.
Might be the only slide.
Anyways,
basically,
There you go. Yes.
Yes.
okay. Okay. So, for our Wake Tech courses at Apex High School, we had noticed that a lot of students weren't really sure about what Wake Tech was, and all of our leadership has taken or is taking an AP course or a Wake Tech course. And we recognize the importance, and we noticed that, especially in our AP courses, there wasn't much diversity. I'm in AP Lit right now. I've also taken AP US History and AP Language and Composition. And being in those classrooms, I recognize the importance, specifically with AP Language and Composition, where I noticed that it definitely helped me with my writing and definitely got me more connections and opportunities to resources that aren't in academic or honors courses. And being in those classrooms, especially in classrooms like AP US History, where we do talk about racial topics, I felt outnumbered compared to most of my peers, and we had taken interviews from more of our student body and had noticed that a lot of other students of color were feeling the same. So as a result, for Wake Tech classes, or actually I'll talk about AP since that's what I was really on. So for AP courses, what we decided to do was to make a BuzzFeed quiz to give or to spread more awareness about what AP courses would be best for our students. We decided specifically to do a BuzzFeed quiz because in our generation, we know what we like. And BuzzFeed quizzes is one thing that a lot of Gen Z likes to do. A lot of our students talk about it. I love BuzzFeed quizzes, you know, trying to figure out what type of bread I am, all of that fun stuff. So what we decided to do was take information and statistics based off of your personality, based off of your interests, and based off of certain work that you've done, which was incorporated into the algorithm that our Secretary Stephan made. It would tell you what AP course would be best for you or strongly suggested for you to take. And so far, we've had 80 students complete that. So that definitely, I would say, had an impact. And as for our Wake Tech classes, we have something at our school called Freshman Friday, which is when all of our student-led organizations meet in the courtyard or the cafeteria to spread information, rack up some members, spread some information about all of our missions. And so we actually, as Equity Club, had a board set up at one of our Freshman Fridays to spread awareness about Wake Tech. This was definitely impactful because Wake Tech has a lot of unknown, in our case at Apex High School, unknown benefits. I didn't really know what I didn't know what Wake Tech was until I was an upperclassman, and I would say that definitely was a disservice. You know, you can get college credit, guaranteed college credit, and, you know, at a little bit less work, you can do it. You can commute and do it if that's comfortable for you. It has a lot of benefits, and I wasn't sure about that. And a lot of our students had told us, actually, because we held more interviews about that as well, that they didn't really know what Wake Tech was, and especially not how to sign up, but we definitely saw that as problematic. So at our fair, we had a board set up, and we just told them straight up, this is Wake Tech, this is what it does for you. Because at the end of the day, we all want simplicity. What is it? How does it benefit me? And we give out pamphlets and takeaways and little pens and keychains to just kind of plant those seeds and get people who were eligible or not yet eligible to know about it, talk to their parents about it, and just spread awareness, because Wake Tech and AP are equally important in different ways, but everybody deserves the opportunity to at least know about it and to be able to have those opportunities.
Thank you. All right, so we love our student leaders and everyone at your stations. You received the invitation to our Ignite End of the Year celebration that will be at the City of Raleigh Museum on Monday, May 20th. And there you'll hear presentations just like Allison and Leah with all 5 of our schools. And they'll go a little bit more in depth as they present. So, what do you see? We see elementary students, we see a ray of sunshine, we see high school students, middle school. We even had students who came from the Middle East that we did a project with them through behavioral health. But what we see when we see all of our students, our girls, our boys, our multicultural students, our multi-language learners, we see unbounded potential. And that's what our office offers to every student in Wake County, every educator in Wake County. We help to foster and to bring out unbounded potential in our students, our staff, and faculty members. So thank you for allowing us to be with you today. And if you have any questions, we're more than happy to answer. Thank you.
All right, are there questions for anyone on staff or for Ms. Chowdhury or Ms. Howard? Ms. Mahaffey?
First of all, Leah and Allison, thank you for being here. I know you probably skipped part of your school day and like ran over here. Not too much, but what are ways that you see other, whether it's student equity teams that are in the district or other schools that aren't sure or students that aren't sure about starting this, like, how do you get them to understand? Because all of those things that you're doing are student issues that we know exist, but they're student-based solutions. So for those schools that are wondering, how do we connect and make this happen? Do you have any suggestions? Or I was going to ask what type of bread you are, Allison, but I figured that. Oh, excellent.
But to answer your question, I feel like the simplest way that we could spread awareness about equity to schools that don't have equity is possibly by maybe taking in student opinions, interviewing, maybe, just taking in statistics. What do you notice? Do you notice this? Do you notice that? Because I know at my school, we have a lot of students who have had issues in like their AP courses, being the only person of color in the AP course in this day and age, which is interesting. But doing things like that, and they notice issues with these things, but they don't really recognize that it's a problem. So I feel like one thing that we could do to possibly spread awareness and to gauge interest of equity clubs is to just talk to the students more, possibly holding assemblies and making sure that most of the initiatives are student-led, because the mission and the message is important, but so is the execution. Hearing information as a student from another student definitely resonates at a different level than hearing it from a teacher. So I would say that in a nutshell, in short, because I'm not talking about it. Just engaging with students more and asking them their opinions on things.
You're the one sitting in the seats.
That's right. Thank you, Ms. Howard. Any other questions from the board? Mr. Hershey, and then I see Dr. Taylor.
So somewhat piggybacking, and this is more for staff though, we hear great ideas. They identify them. And I appreciate you bringing up the wake tack. If there's anyone in the General Assembly listening, that's a great reason
Got
to
one.
have calendar change. I know that's where I was going with it, but I appreciate that. But to staff, how are we implementing solutions from the equity teams that I wrote it down for long-term sustainable change? So it's not a one-off, because I guarantee that the problems they're identifying are going to be identified next year if we don't do anything, and the year after.
So 2 answers to that. The first one is join us on Monday, May 20th, for our end of the year celebration, where they will go into sustainability. But you are absolutely correct, because as cohort 1 cycles out, we are bringing in cohort 2 at the beginning of next year. So there'll be 9 new teams, 1 from each area. And so how do we continue to support cohort 1? So we will support them with PLCs, so they'll have a professional learning community to continue their work. We were able to offer them some funding this year through our grant, and so now they will come off the funding, and we will have to work through how that will work, because there are some schools who needed funding for different things in the school to continue the work. But one of the goals in this project was sustainability, right? So if you were able to get more students to enroll in AP this year, we can't just stop it this year. We have to continue for the juniors, the sophomore, and the freshmen. So one thing that they do is they recruit underclassmen so they can continue to work in their equity clubs, so it doesn't graduate when seniors graduate as well. And so we talk to them, sometimes have a quantitative brain, but about longitudinal data. And so we look at what happened last year, and now let's compare it to this year, and we're going to project out 2028. And we set an end goal, and so every year this is a project that our school will tackle to continue to increase those numbers to reach our goal and increase in representation.
Follow up.
So I really appreciate that. I think in general, when we have presentations, the sustainability aspect of a program is super valuable for me as a board member to hear, and I would think, for my fellow board members as well. So I would encourage that always at these. And I will follow up with Dr. Chavis on what Sanderson did, because I'm super excited.
Oh, yeah, and they're going to be there on Monday, May 20th.
I hear you, but
And I do want to add
conversation about Sanderson.
one thing with Chauncey, we're going to talk middle schools.
Okay.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's it.
But
No, I
for
wouldn't, but I can.
sustainability, one thing Chauncey has done that I applaud him, he is the equity team guru. He began at Apex Middle School with his student equity team, which matriculated into the high school. And so Chauncey has been very intentional with looking at feeder schools of our high schools that have equity teams, so he can begin to build capacity in the 7th and 8th graders. So once they matriculate into the high school, they can continue to work. They know how agendas are ran, how meetings are ran, and how to look at an equity problem and begin to face it, and how to begin to resolve and solve it. And so he begins early on in the middle schools. So when they get to high schools, what we're learning is if they have teams in the middle school, they get to the high school and the high school doesn't have it, they're advocating to start. And so that's another way that we're beginning to build capacity and sustain our work. I didn't want to take Chauncey's thunder, but I did want to cheer for
It
him.
was all right. I appreciate it. Thank you
Because
so
that's
much.
amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, and I was just going to add on to what Janine said. The way we're building capacity is continue to provide PLCs for those advisors as well. So not only do we train the teams, we actually train the advisors separate from the teams before they even begin. And that way they have capacity, and then we meet monthly with those advisors. I'm always on the phone at 8:15 this morning with an advisor. Actually, just trying to make sure that they have capacity and coherence about what it is that they need to do to continue to provide for the team. We even walk through specifically, how do you recruit for the team? So that they have that information. And then we provide them with a booklet in the beginning of the year, training manual, if you will, for advisors and for students, so that they can have that all year long and continue to reference back, so that when it gets to March, you forget what we talked about in August, you can reference back to that material and know exactly what you need to do.
All right. Ms. Rice and then Dr. Taylor.
Sure. I just want to say I'm over here excited and glowing about the amazing presentation that you all did today. I do professional development in my other job. You nailed it. It was really fantastic. I want to just say one thing. Equity saves us money. And I need for us to understand that as we move forward as a board, as we share this through our district. This young lady just laid out how we save money through equity. And it's about shared resources so that everybody does what Dr. Taylor likes to say, level up. So that we can create a place of leveling up and then growth right within our district. And so I just really want to applaud the amazing work that our equity team does. Sometimes, things aren't always shared of really how necessary equity is. And I'll continue to say equity is not a bad four-letter word, right? It is not a bad word. It is a word that is going to get us where we want to go as a society, and it's going to sustain us, and it's going to equip us to utilize our tax dollars well, right? She just shared that. Resource, if they know more, they can do more, utilizing tax dollars of our partnership within our community college system, and making sure that all students know and are aware and what to do and how to utilize it, which in turn fuels our economy, because we'll have an educated workforce that actually knows what to do, and I don't have to train them when they actually leave the college and come to my office. So thank you, hats off. I'll continue to support the great work that you all do.
Thank you
Thank you,
very
thank you,
much.
thank you. Hard work, Carson.
Dr. Taylor with our last word.
So just a comment, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to thank you both for being here, and you both are a reminder to me that we need to listen to student voices. And so I heard your comments about weight tech, AP, and knowing the difference. And so I always believe that we're doing that work to actually help students and parents understand. You now let me know that there's a bit more, probably a lot more that we need to do. So thank you for that reminder, and thank you for your voice. I have heard you, and we will pay close attention. Great job.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. And I think it wouldn't surprise anybody if I predict this won't be the last that we hear from these students and advocate for other important policies for our school system. So, Mr. Hatcher, Dr. Perry Campbell, thank you so much. If there's nothing else, wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Allison has one more thing she wants to say to end it today.
Just one more thing. I just want to say to
Go
I
ahead.
just want to say to everyone that I'm very grateful that we've been welcomed here, me and Leah. We worked very hard this year, and I'm very proud of all of the work that Apex and Enlo and all of the other schools have put in, and it definitely means a lot. I can say behalf on the student population to be heard and to be in these rooms with you guys, the people who are actually making decisions. It makes me feel very heard, and it gives me more hope for the years to come. And I'm very proud for the work that Apex has done, and I know that we're in good hands, and I know that you guys are in good hands, and it just gives me a lot of hope for my future. And makes me feel happier to know that generations after me will possibly have more insight and opportunities that I didn't have, and to be a part of that and to know that there's a room of people who are on my team and on my side makes me feel really happy. So thank you for having me here.
Is she on the leadership team?
And you can hear from Monday, May 20th.
Monday, May 20th at the City of Raleigh Museum.
All right.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you all. All right. We'll take a minute to transition, but next on our agenda will be our discussion of meal prices for the 24-25 school year with Mark Strickland and Paula DeLuca, who's the Senior Director of Child Nutrition Services.
That was excellent. It's done that before.
I had that same problem.
Yeah, it gets moody sometimes. It's just like, no, I'm not getting in.
They were amazing.
I went this afternoon to Wake Forest Middle School. I had one of the girls went out and she wanted to see the C-SPAN.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and
I
just
think that
see
young
her.
lady is one of the seats.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm. She was in high school.
Because I go to Enroll tomorrow for it.
So she was a fifth
That's all. Drink open? Oh, yeah, there we go.
Yeah,
All right.
speak so eloquently in front of everybody.
All right, we've got everybody back. So, Mr. Strickland or Mr. Luca, I'm not sure who's leading the presentation, but Mr. Luca?
Thank you.
All right, begin whenever you're ready.
Well, good afternoon, Board Chair Higgerty, members of the board, and Superintendent Taylor. I'm here today to talk about a potential meal price increase that we have to look at annually to determine whether or not the cost of providing meal services to our students is covered with anticipated revenues. So I put together a few different slides. First of all, I'd like to point out that for those who have been members of the board for some time, forgive me for any repetition, but for those that haven't been, I'd like to give a little background on how CNS works so that you have an understanding of our revenue streams and some of the costs that we have to work through. So when it comes to our primary recurring earned revenue sources, when I say primary, we're effectively talking about federal reimbursements that come to us only when meals are served. We're talking about cash payments from students that only come from those that are eligible for paid meals. And then we do have some after-school snack program services that we provide. That's another consistent revenue stream, but it's a very, very small one. And then we also operate the summer food service program. That program provides services to students on non-instructional days, such as for our Read to Achieve camps, the re-administration that occurs at the end of the school year, and then from the end of a school year until school starts again in the new coming year, when we work with community sites to provide services so that we close the gap on nutrition for as many students as we can. The second primary thing that I'd like to talk about with regard to our actual services that we provide is to really understand what constitutes that meal that we talk about. We're discussing a meal price increase for breakfast and lunch, so we're not really talking about ancillary services at this point. The most important thing for you to know is that by laws, child nutrition services may not receive any federal funding unless, number one, as I mentioned, a meal is served. And number two, if we meet certain portion size requirements and we provide certain items as a component of our meals each day that constitute a reimbursable meal. And then finally, in addition to just those basic things, we have nutritional content that we have to comply with. That includes calorie ranges that, interestingly enough, if you look at them, between an elementary grade group and a middle school group, I have a 50-calorie slice that I have to swing into. And when you move between middle and high school, I think we get about a 100-calorie swing. So when you think about what food constitutes, it's a huge puzzle piece of trying to figure out how do you meet those component requirements for lean proteins, all whole grains, fruits, vegetables, low-fat dairy. And one of the pieces to peel away on this, when it comes to the vegetables, we're required to provide compliance on what we call subgroup vegetables. What that means is we have to meet leafy green requirements, red-orange requirements, and all of these disparate groups of vegetable requirements, by the way, that we can't really serve a starchy vegetable until we've met the primary requirements. And so it gets really complicated when you try to figure out how to put a meal together.
And whole apples not sliced, despite most kids wanting sliced apples.
And then the icing on the cake is that we may not have any additional trans fats in our menus. We have to meet 10% or less sat fats. We have sodium restrictions that, by the way, effective in 2025, are going to become more restrictive. We will have also at that time sugar requirements applied. And then we've got, just a bevy of things that we do with regard to the meals that we're serving. The only exception that we can make in our provisions for providing meals is for those students that have a dairy or a dietary accommodation that must be met. For those of you who don't know, we have 2,000 special diets that we prepare. Those can be anything from an allergy type of diet to an ingredient-based diet. So we could have a student that's allergic to cinnamon, and we have to go through every product to make sure that there is no cinnamon and develop a menu specific to that student. We also partner with our special education staff, and we provide texture modified diets that have to be precisely diced to 4 different gradient levels in our cafes for students who have difficulty swallowing. And then we also provide provisions for students that have really, really serious swallowing difficulties and have texture-modified diets in terms of like liquid, the viscosity of liquids effectively. Those particular meals can cost us upwards of $10 a piece. And that's because we have to make special purchases that we can't get through a mainline distributor in order to meet those students' needs.
That's for the 2,000.
Pardon me?
That was for the 2,000.
We have about 2,000 today.
So they're $10 a piece.
Of what?
They're $10 a piece.
They can run up to $10 in cost. An entree alone could cost us sometimes $7.
And just to be clear, that's not the price you're charging, that's the cost to the district.
That's the cost we pay. It's not what we charge. That's what's important to know. And we then have to have very, very specifically trained staff to be able to take care of dicing and slicing, as we say in the kitchen, all of our items to meet these very rigid specifications that if we do not do that, the safety of the student gets put at risk. So we take a lot of time and care into making sure our special diets are formulated appropriately. And by law, we're not allowed to charge any more to those students than we would for the general student population. So a student that's eligible for free meals will, of course, receive their special diet accommodation at no cost, and a paying student would simply pay the normal paid meal price. When we look at our primary expenditures, we have two sources that seem to pop to the top. It's not uncustomary in a food service environment. There's typically these two major cost categories. The first is food. The second is salaries and benefits. I provided you with a chart to show you how our expenditures are kind of partitioned out just as a group of expenditures. This is not a cost dollar analysis. This is just taking total expenditures and partitioning them out. And this was as of a certain day based on what we actually have paid out. It's not terribly different from what we would call a cost dollar analysis, which is effectively the percentage of cost to the revenue coming in per dollar. In this example, just looking at the expenditures, you can see the orange slice is wages and benefits, and then we pay an indirect cost to the school system to help offset some incidental costs that the district incurs to support child nutrition services, and that's the orange gradient slice.
Capped at 8%.
So that slice of indirect cost is actually based on our human resources costs. So the higher our cost for wages and benefits, the more we would pay in indirect cost. And then our food is coming in at about 32% of the pie in terms of just total expenditures at this time. The other costs that we have are things such as contract services, like we have to have our kitchen hoods inspected for safety. We have a dietetic services provider that helps us with all of those special diets, because we really need somebody who's well educated and knows specifically how to interpret ingredients. It's become very complicated. Milk is not always milk on a statement of ingredients, and so we've got to have somebody that's got that technical expertise. And then there are other service providers that we contract with. We have technology that, by the way, we had to eliminate our entitled technology budget this year and replacing very aged computer equipment because we had to use that money to pay for our salaries and benefits. We also have expenditures that are really things like equipment, which on a $60 million budget, our equipment budget is $250,000. That's to take care of all of the equipment in all 200 schools when it no longer works. And then finally, well, I think I've covered pretty much the main categories, but if you have any questions afterward, I'd be happy to answer those. So I'd like to focus for a moment on the food. As a best practice, food is supposed to comprise 40 to 45% of your earned revenue. Wages and benefits is supposed to comprise 40%. So I'd like to walk you through a scenario so you understand what our dilemma is when it comes to using the resource that we have. If you were to take an elementary school meal price today at $3.25, and if you were to add the 50-cent paid reimbursement that we get for every paid meal we serve, it comes to $3.75. If you took a look at what your food budget would be, looking at 40 to 45%, that's going to give you $1.50 to $1.70 to spend on food. Most of our students take milk with their meal. Milk today on average costs us 30 cents a carton. So that brings us down to about $1.20 to $1.40 to spend on an edible portion of food. Our most favorite entree that we serve today is a chicken sandwich. That chicken sandwich costs $1.22. If you think about the $1.20 I have to spend and the $1.40 I have to spend, When I serve that chicken sandwich, I am either running in the negative by 2 cents, or if my food comes in at the higher end of the 45%, I get 18 more cents to spend. I still have not met the fruit requirement, nor have I met the vegetable requirement, although the whole grain requirement, thankfully, is part of the sandwich. And by the way, a side salad as part of the meal costs 83 cents. On the lowest ends, it costs about 75 cents. Sometimes, we work with market changes. So anywhere between 75 to 85 cents is the cost for that salad. And I still have not met the requirements of the meal because that only provides me a half cup serving. And by the way, the student has to take a half of a cup or fruit or vegetable with their sandwich to qualify for that meal, for that reimbursement. And I still have vegetables, or I should say other fruits to provide, and another serving of vegetable. And while students don't have to take that, they're entitled to take it, and we're required to offer it. And so if they take it, it becomes part of our cost of operating. And certainly, we're really glad when they do, because if anything, we'd love them to take more fruits and vegetables. So that's a scenario I wanted to paint for you because I think it's important to look at what the best standard is supposed to be, where we're operating, and candidly, this is, like I said, a partitioning of expenses on a date, but our third quarter financial results, it's preliminary, not final yet, is showing that our wages, benefits, cost is actually around 59%, so it's up from 57%. And our food is running in around 38%. 38% is really good. That means we're trying to really, work hard on providing the foods and options available that we can make available to students while staying within a budget. But what it really shows is that we're borrowing from one category to pay for another. And we have to do that because we're trying to work within the constraints that we're dealt with in terms of our funding. I would like to say the federal reimbursement rates, they're adjusted annually. What the metric that's used is there was a baseline established many, many, many years ago, and it's written into law that the CPI, food away from home, for all urban consumers, the change from May to May is the percentage that's used to apply to the current year to come up with the next year's reimbursement rate. Didn't know if anybody needed to know that, but again, we're limited to that particular ceiling. So for our key elevated costs, I think that, again, we're working with compounded year-over-year increases that began in 2022. Our wages are up about $5.50 on average, probably just a tiny bit less than that, but may as well use $5.50. And as we look to next year, our budget does not include any wage increases. We also have a food packaging service fee rebalancing that's kind of taking place in the market, which is good. We've seen some decreases in some product prices, but we've also seen increases. And our mainline distributor, who provides us with about $16 million worth of food and supplies every year, would not renew our contract. And we were only in our second year. And our price for distribution fees had already gone up last year. But they did not renew, and those bids are not due until May. So at this time, I do not know what that pricing will look like. But I can't imagine that they wouldn't have maintained it, expecting that, at some point they would not see or see a benefit in maintaining it if they hadn't planned on increasing their price. So I don't foresee them bidding and having the price come down. I see them bidding and having the price come up. And also, just so you know, there's not a lot of competition on distributors. We work with one in this area that has bid on us the last few bids. Some of the distributors in the market have pulled out of the K-12 operation because we're not necessarily high profit endeavor for them compared to restaurants, healthcare, and other lines of business. And this is not something that's just something that Wake County is experiencing. This is a statewide concern, and it's a national concern because last year a lot of distributors pulled out and canceled contracts at the last minute on school districts. So the last thing we want to be is in a position where we can't get food and supplies, and there were districts that faced that last year. We've been fortunate. We've had a good working partnership, and our supplier's been very reliable. One of the last things that I'd like to touch on is our cessation of bridge funding. We have received upwards of just about $11-12 million in supply chain assistance funds and local food for schools funds the last couple of years. This year, we relied on $4 million to offset our expenditures. So that's $4 million that if it had not been there, we would be in a serious, much more serious situation than we currently feel like we're in. I would like to say that we do plan on carrying some forward to next year. We just got an allotment again this particular month, but that is expected to be the last. We have not heard anything from the United States Department of Agriculture that they intend to continue with those post-pandemic supports. So I just want you to be aware of that. So as we look to the coming year, $2.7 million was built into our budget as the supply chain assistance carryover funding. I would like to share that I have been working diligently with staff to try to figure out, is there another way we could look at our staffing of school-based operations? And we've come up with a thought about regionalizing some of our campus operations where we've got an elementary school and a middle school or a high school on the same campus, and regionalizing management oversight. We've got a number of campuses. We could do that through attrition. In so doing, I can tell you that there will be a savings if we can implement it, but if we implement it, it will require a restructuring of all of our school-based staff. And the incremental value will be negligible, but it will be there. It doesn't even begin to approach $500,000. It's slightly under that. So as we look at revenue and the potential for a paid meal price of 25 cents for breakfast and lunch, the collective gain from that would be about $1.1 million. A lot of people think that 25 cents is going to create lots and lots of extra income, but it doesn't. We're only talking about paying students, and unless participation goes up a lot, we're not going to generate a great amount of income from that. So 1.1 million would be what we think is our top level gain. One of the things I would like to mention that is a last resort, that's to tap our fund balance, also known as a net cash resource. We've been doing that. And so we have to be super careful with that because we're eroding it by tapping it. And that erosion will create a potential problem that will affect the school system with regard to its reliance on child nutrition for those indirect costs I talked about. There's state legislation that says the most that the school system can charge child nutrition is 8%, and that's based on two classifications. It's our human resources cost, wages, benefits, and then there's one other small classification within the expenditure category we have. But if our fund balance drops below 2 months operating, meaning if our expenditures on average for a month times 2 does not equal or exceed, or if our fund balance does not equal or exceed that, then the school system can no longer collect its indirect cost. And so if the school system is relying on that money, the more we tap into that fund balance, the more that erodes and drops below that 2-month operating balance. Automatically in the very next year, the school system will not be able to collect that. And how does that occur? Well, our books get closed typically around September in the coming year, and it will be at that point in time in which it would be determined that already after the school system is up and operating, they can't collect the cost for that existing year. So now that I've covered a lot of those cost and revenue items, the last thing I'd like to finish with before opening for discussion is this. I do have some good news, and I hope to come to the work session on May 21st to talk to you a little bit more about the community eligibility provision. We talked about that last year, and after doing some data analysis based on our students that are directly certified for SNAP, TANF, or our homeless migrant runaway or foster, we have found that going into this coming school year, we have the potential to add 22 to 28 more schools, which provides free lunch and breakfast for all students in those schools, which on top of the 12 we currently operate, will take us up to 34 to 40 schools. So we're inching toward that, but we don't control that because it's all based on our population of students and what they qualify for based on their economic status as a family. With that, I've wrapped up what I intended to talk about. Now I'm anxious to hear what you have to say.
All right, thank you, Mr. Luca. And so, just to be clear, what are the next steps and what decisions are coming before the board?
The next step would be, we would like to place on consent at the next board meeting, meaning May 21st, your approval of a meal price increase for breakfast and lunch at 25 cents.
Okay, thank you. All right, you've gotten a lot of information in the presentation. I know there's some bigger questions we've had about CEP, and we've seen what some other districts have done around that. It sounds like that discussion will come at another time. So based on today's presentation, does anyone have any questions for Mr. Luca or Mr. Strickland?
I'll go second.
All right, we'll start with Ms. Mahaffey and then Mr. Hershey.
So last year around this time, we had a conversation about meal prices, and one of the figures that we had was the question of what would it cost to cover meals for everybody, not just with the community, forgetting the CEP, but for every student, and I believe that was around $30 million. Is that correct? For every student?
That in and of itself is a moving target.
Right.
And the reason why it's a moving target is those students that qualify for SNAP and TANF is a moving target.
Yeah.
I was asked recently to put together some projections, and my most recent projection is that it actually comes now around to 20 million.
Okay.
Again, and that actually is based on the assumption that the meal prices next year would increase by 25 cents. What makes it so difficult is that it's that data piece that really is the derivative of the families and what's happening with families. And our free and reduced used to be about 32% many years ago. I would say 10 years ago when I first came to the district. Right before the pandemic, it started to slip to 30%. Currently over 37%. So that's an indication that our families are struggling more because they're actually qualifying for some pretty rigid, for some programs that have some pretty rigid requirements. And so as a result of all of those changes, that's what factors into that.
Thank you, Ms. DeLuca. I appreciate you letting us know that it continues to be a moving target, and certainly I know many folks are advocating at the state and federal level for free meals. I can't think about meal prices and school lunches without thinking about food waste. So I'm just going to turn to Mr. Hershey and with Mr. Strickland's ear of perhaps we can talk about our current waste contracts at some point and what it would look like to have composting in our schools. I know we get to then talk about fun things like the cost per garbage tip and the availability or inavailability of composting throughout the district, but I feel like you can't have one without thinking of the other, at least in my head. So I'm just going to put that out there and I'll be done.
So we'll put the
Good segue.
composting
Yeah.
discussion onto facilities and sustainability.
I'm not going to talk about that, but I
Okay.
am going to talk about food waste in another sense. And you knew I emailed you, so you know I was going to ask this. because I don't think we can talk about the composting aspect without getting at how much food are we wasting every single day? And do we have a sense? And this is going to lead me to ask what, as Wake County, as the biggest school district, what advocacy or advocating have we done directly to the federal government to change standards around this? Have we done any ever? And I'm not saying that it's your job, I'm just, as a district, do we ever do anything? Because, I mean, how many whole apples are getting thrown away all the time? Or milk cartons?
I'd be very happy to answer that question.
Yeah.
I've been in school nutrition for 42 years, and I have marched the Hill with thousands of my colleagues throughout this country to talk to our representatives about the need to address some of our concerns with regard to the nutrition requirements and other things related to our programs. More recently, the funding levels that are insufficient to cover our costs for meals. My passion is in trying to figure out how to provide a service at a reasonable cost that the kids like, the families value, and that's sustainable. And so as a district, I can't speak for that, but I can tell you that I feel like in my time here in Wake County, I represent Wake County. I know in my former position, I was the direct liaison with all of the federal legislators and our House of Representatives. It's not uncommon for me to advocate where it's appropriate for me to advocate for those things.
Do we have a legislative agenda for the federal government?
We don't.
at all?
No, we never have.
Because I would like us, we talk about what are we going to do to change Wake County and become more of a leader and to level up. Why I think it's a mistake for us not to use our collective voice as the biggest school district to take the lead, to have our, I know our U.S. representatives, Deborah Ross for one, Congressman Ross and others, probably, they visit our schools. I don't know if we talk about this with them directly.
Yes.
Okay, good. But I would like us to have that's true and sad, but we have a lot of politicians coming to visit the state these days. How do we use our collective voice for it? And I would like to see some kind of, to support it, how do we do a food waste study? Where we say, and can put facts to it, because we're spending all this money on food, and 30% of it could be going straight into the trash. And I think that's a problem that we have to, as we talk about sustainability, we can't talk about the back end and exclude the front end of why it's happening.
And so again, more topics for a future discussion, but you can see how this would impact meal prices and
Correct.
a lot of discussions, right? We talk about food waste. Is the food waste caused because nutritional requirements require food that kids do not want? Or is it that because so little money is appropriated for food, we do the best with the dollars that we have, but the food that we can afford may not be as attractive as other foods with that nutritional value? And just getting more of a perspective on that, I think, would be helpful for a future meeting.
I don't want to speak out of turn,
No.
but I would like to say that if we do conduct a food waste study, I think it's really important to also conduct a time study in concert with it, in terms of the amount of time students have actually to sit and eat, because the two do go hand in hand. One thing I did not mention was how, as one of our cost controls this year, we eliminated a lot of positions to try to figure out how to get cost out. And when that happens, we have less staff in schools. And sometimes what that means is it slows down the cashier. And so the longer it takes for students to get through a line, the less time they have to sit. So it's interesting how integrated all of these things become in service to our students.
Thank you, Mr. Luca. And what I do want to do is I do want to bring us back to the question of school year meal prices and just keep us focused on that question for us. I see Dr. Ing, Ms. Rice, and then Ms. Caulfield. Did you have
Yes.
a question? All right. Dr. Ing.
Thank you. When you talk about redesign operations to regionalize management oversight, what about the food preparation aspect of things? Is that also being consolidated in some ways, or try to do some cost savings there?
I brought this team of people together, and we started out with a blank slate, and we looked at what if we talked to the school system about building a central production facility. Well, that's going to be up 10 to 20 million. I have a feeling they might not be able to support that. We talked about the possibility of cooking at one location and transporting. Now we need vehicles, and now we need more people to transport. So the cost savings probably might not be realized. We looked at that. But one of the things that we did think about in this regionalization was that if we take those campuses where you've got an elementary and middle or a high school, if there's two that are nestled together, and we even looked at a couple of schools that weren't on a campus but were in close proximity to one another, where could they refine their back-of-house operations so that one is producing all the salads, the other one's producing everything else, and they do a swap so that they're getting efficiency from time, and that might lead to some conservation on the cost of time. However, you have to remember that when you're looking at people, hours matters, and it's harder to find part-time staff than full-time staff, so you have to balance that in.
Thank
I
you.
hope I've answered that question.
Thank you, Dr. Ing. Ms. Rice.
So I give permission for you guys to bring me in if this is that May 21st question and when we're going to discuss this a little further. But in reference to cost, I think I'm asking a question that falls in line with this, but it kind of asked around CEP. So in essence, my main concern is the rise of these costs and our huge population of students who currently cannot afford where we already are and not receiving food, and you guys are talking about waste. I've had a couple of families already where students are not able, or families are not able to pay for food, and we've had a presentation around this table before to enlighten those who did not know that these children don't get food. And so Mr. Hershey talked about leading. We're the largest district in the state. Why do we look at the presentation? We see Chatham, we see Mecklenburg, and we see Durham, where their children are getting free food. They're utilizing a program and a system that exists. I cannot imagine that we don't have, if not more, students who are without food funding, that we're not utilizing CEP to fund our school meals.
So I think that's an appropriate question to ask for this discussion. I know a lot of it will get into the details about CEP, and again, we don't want to have that discussion here, but I think your question deserves an answer. Mr. Luca, can you briefly talk about, is there any particular impact that would, where Wake would be significantly different than some of these other counties?
Absolutely.
And then if it requires more discussion, we can have that then on the 20th.
Yeah, so like if you look at Durham's identified student percentage, which is the basis to qualify schools or a group of schools for CEP, it is considerably higher than Wake County schools overall. We're at about, I think if I'm correct in my recollection of my data, we're at about a 30% mark, and I believe Durham's upwards of 45 to 50%. So that automatically gives them a pot of students that in the context of their total population, they can leverage more, which allows them to bring in more schools into CEP. So it all goes back to the students who qualify for SNAP benefits and TANF benefits. It has nothing to do with free and reduced. SNAP and TANF qualifiers are a component of the free and reduced, but it's not the free and reduced.
So my follow-up with that is, the other piece that I want to say is, if we're only looking at the data that's provided, I know for a fact there are families who are on this. How in depth or how assertive are we of doing exactly what these young ladies just shared today? Making sure that people really know that they can apply for food assistance so that we get a real accurate snapshot of families who really are in need of it but don't know that they necessarily qualify. And so if we're only looking at data that we're getting and with just happenstance that people happen to participate in it, how aggressive are we with making sure that every single family of 159,000 students know this is available outside of our emails we like to send at the beginning of the year? So let me make sure I include that I know we do that. But how assertive are we doing that, knowing that this rise of costs, knowing that there's still a huge population of students, two I already know that I've had to deal with this week, to share this resource with them about applying for the food, whether it's free or whether it's reduced or whatever, so that they know that this resource is available.
And so, Ms. DeLuca, if we can add this to the list, because I think the point here is one that if we had better engagement with families in terms of their eligibility and also assistance in how to process the applications for that eligibility, there might be some savings that we could see, in our overall food program while directly helping those families. If we could just add that to that CEP discussion, then we can address it more, because I think it deserves some conversation, but I also want to be sensitive to what we're talking about today. Dr. Taylor, did you have a...
No, I was just going to say that it really is the balance between a school or a district qualifying for CEP and whether or not there's going to be a benefit for you to get it. One of the concerns that principals had about CEP versus the certification that we do now is that they do have control over parents filling out an application versus the qualification being done through DHHS, and that's why they do have a multiplier that gets their numbers back up for Title I, which is not necessarily related. But ultimately, the whole idea is getting everybody to understand the food cost, and that if we don't have the proper revenue, then that presents a problem. CEP is wonderful. That's absolutely what you want to do. But a district has to really qualify in order to bring everybody in. If they don't meet that threshold, then you end up doing individual schools. But we'll definitely get into that later.
Thank you. Ms. Caulfield?
I had a couple of questions, thank you. The requirements on the snacks, meals, and desserts, because just kind of going back to like what is being thrown out, that was one of my questions and points. When you sit with your kids in lunch, and it's a blessing to go in there and sit with them and hear all their fun conversations, but you do also see, and also that Every Trade Counts program that I have been part of, that was specifically standing there helping all of these students kind of recycle. You just watched how much was not even opened and thrown out. Kids will go for the cookies. They will go for the ice cream cake. I guarantee you those little ice cream sandwiches before they will eat. So eat like the whole food. So what are the requirements when it comes to like those type of things on the plate, that if nothing else was available and that kid was, hungry, he's going to eat the sandwich because that's what's in front of him?
Are you asking the requirements for the items when they're sold a la carte?
Well, so you said that there's all these requirements that have to go on their plate. You broke it down with a certain amount of protein, a certain amount of vegetable assortment. So I'm asking, how does the desserts get on there?
Oh, okay. So that's a good question, actually. Thank you for asking that. We call those supplemental sales, but technically it's just an a la carte purchase where they're buying individual items. Those have caloric limits, sugar limits, they've got nutrient limits on them, and they meet what's called a federal Smart Snack Rule requirement. And I will share with you, it's absolutely critical that we sell those items to the greatest extent possible, or we will find ourselves in a worse financial situation, because the profit from those items offsets the cost to provide meals, because the reimbursements and the cash combination is insufficient to cover cost. So, if that were something that the district wanted to entertain, just be forewarned that the financial shortfall would grow considerably.
Ms. Caulfield, could I kind
Yeah,
of help
go
add
ahead.
to the question, because I think this may have been what you were asking too. I think a question may have been, what are the rules about a kid coming to the line and only buying a la carte versus a reimbursable meal?
Oh, no.
Oh,
I
right.
didn't mean only. I just
Okay.
meant that they were there, and I know that the kids are often, and they're eating their ice cream sandwich, and then the teacher says, and that was going to be my second point, was elementary school, you got to stand on the line, you got to walk the line down the hallway. It all takes time. High school, they have different levels that they have to go. That also takes time. So to actually have the time, and it's really upsetting to hear that we're eliminating positions that would actually not only assist in that, get moving along, but also we do need that hands-on. So that's upsetting to hear that we would have to get rid of roles in order to do that. It's kind of counterproductive. But if they're adding those things on there, and with the amount of time they have, they're going to start with that ice cream sandwich, which I understand you're saying that's like a catch-22. We lose money, but then the kid is not eating what he has to, and then we throw it all in the garbage. So we're wasting money. So we're earning money but wasting money. So it's...
And so the way I view these things is it's a matter of the choice that you'd like to make for the outcome that we live with, and it's not as simple as it might seem.
And do we have any other, and this is probably for the other the other meeting, do we ever find or have a way to evaluate the waste? Because I know he asked about the waste, but have we ever had any data or anything on it?
No, not since I've been in Wake. I mean, it's something that we'd have to come up with a team that would be assigned to trash cans effectively and have to do
It does sound like there's a lot of interest in food waste, so let's definitely bring that back for another meeting.
Because I feel like we
But-
could go back to legislation with, you're giving us these requirements, but this
Yeah.
is not what's effective.
Yeah, and I have thoughts on that too, but and I can give you some good examples of where that's even, like this federal and state law, but
Yes.
I do want to keep us back. I know some people want to speak a second time and some people haven't spoken yet the first time, so Ms. Edmonds?
Oh, sure.
Last year when we had to make this decision, I don't think any of us wanted to raise the cost. Can you please remind us what happens if we vote not to raise the cost, if we don't do it?
Yeah, sure. Our choice becomes this. We reduce our costs, which we have two categories, prime categories, which means we reduce our food cost, and we can't eliminate portions because by federal law, we have to meet portions, so that means reducing quality. Our other choice is to reduce our staff, and we've talked about what that implication could be. The third choice would be to do nothing along those lines, and it would be to use, as I referenced, our fund balance, at which time that could put the school system on the hook. And we're kind of on that periphery right now. It's very slim as to where we stand.
Mr. Nieder, did you want to?
Yeah, if I could
To that, please.
and tie what Mr. Lucas talked about back to the operating budget, which we'll be talking about 2 items from now. What Mr. Lucas is saying is that fund balance slips below a 2-month reserve level, and that the district won't receive indirect costs. That's a general form of revenues, just like the county appropriation, red light camera fees, fines, and forfeitures. So if that indirect cost revenue is lost, it will be another item. It will be another item to reconcile to the operating budget, and we'll have to find a way to either stop doing something else within the operating budget or something else. And let me go a little bit further even. If we're to get to the point where not only does the fund balance slip below a 2-month supply, but the enterprise operation is running a negative without any fund balance, then the district would be required to use local funding to make the enterprise program balance. We're required to have that budget balance, which means something else in the operating budget would have to be reduced or given up.
May I follow up?
Please.
Just quickly, the vote was split last year, but I know that I was one of the ones that voted in favor of the increase. It didn't reflect my values, and I've got concerns about that this year.
Ms. Posey?
I would add that, so our current indirect cost is $3 million that we collect from child nutrition. And our last FC1A, which is what we report quarterly to DPI, was right at the 2 months threshold. There is the March 31st quarter. It's apparently in my box, and I have not signed off on it yet, so I do not know what the threshold was for quarter 3. But I've got staff looking right now.
Thank you, Ms. Posey. So if I could ask some questions, I'd like to get back to the presentation. On page 3, you talked about the cessation of bridge funding, and that looks like $11.5 million. Now, I know when we've looked at what the proposed meal increase could raise, it was raising about $1.1 million. So talk to us a little bit more about the impact of losing the bridge funding and what that means to the district, as opposed to what we're seeing by the proposed increase.
So that bridge funding of about $11 million streamed into us over the course of 3 years now. We got it, and we carried some over to this year, and then we got another allotment this year. That's why the $2.7 million that we've got carried over for next year is part of a $3.7 million I got this month. Well, actually, yeah, just a couple weeks ago. But that bridge funding's not going to continue to be coming to us. That's the issue. We got a small slice coming from NCDA for those local foods for schools, but our first allotment was about $600,000, and I don't expect it to come in probably near $300,000. I think we'd be lucky. So if you think about the $4 million that I know I have tracked that we have used in that funding as a cost of that funding for a cost offset this year, you start with that. If we got $1.1 million in the paid meals as the price increase, then that brings us down to what, $2.9 million thereabout. Part of that is potentially our net cash resource that we talked about. If we got lucky, and this is really, if we got lucky, it goes back to CEP, but if we got really lucky and we got huge, magnificent increases in participation in those CEP schools, there's a residual effect to that, and there's some additional income that can come from that. That would be a benefit. Because right now, if you take our meal price and the federal funding we get, it's not as much as our free reimbursement rate, and our free reimbursement rate isn't enough to cover costs. So by going on CEP and getting that higher free reimbursement rate, it helps close up and shore that gap a little bit more. So that might be part of it, but I can't guarantee anything because we haven't arrived there yet.
Thank you. And then the second thing is, when you were talking about balancing operations and sort of optimally, and I couldn't tell if this is what was suggested or what was required under the federal regs, you talked about food costs should be 45% of your revenue, wages should be 40% of the revenue, but then we see on the chart our food costs are 32% and our wages are 57%. Now, we also know that we've had vacancies to fill and that the wages we pay have not been competitive with similar jobs in the private sector. So help me reconcile that 45 and 40 balance versus where we are now with a higher percentage going to wages, and then what seems to be a necessity for keeping wages high or even higher to try to keep those vacancies filled, or keep those positions filled so they won't be vacancies.
So the only thing I can think of likening this to is our outside world, outside of child nutrition. And I'll use this scenario, and it's not a fair one, but I went to a fast casual restaurant for lunch recently. I did a pick two. I got a nice little bowl of soup, and I got a nice little salad. And I paid about $16. Oh, I got a nice crusty bread to go with it, and I did get some butter. I got butter, too. However, if you think about that, it doesn't even begin to comply with the meal standards that we have to comply with. Portion sizes aren't there. And so those outside restaurants that we go to for our food, that's called food away from home. I talked about the CPI and how it increases, right? They've been increasing their prices because they've had to pay more for their labor. And so they don't provide the food at no cost. They're not operating in a negative, per se. So that's one of the distinctions between us and the outside sector, is we're not elevating our prices at a rate to cover the cost that we're not deciding. If you looked at us as a business, we're not making all those decisions in light of the revenue stream. Instead, we're delivered decisions effectively and need to figure out how to use our revenue for the best that we can. That's one of the distinctions. That's a fair example.
Yeah, Mr. Nader?
Yeah, if I could just add again, as Mr. Lucas said, there are two primary drivers of the cost of the child nutrition operation, food and labor. We know what food prices have been doing. Mr. Lucas just shared examples of that. We experience that all personally when we go to the grocery store to go out to eat that. And the labor cost, as we look at how our wages have gone from just a few years ago, our lowest paid staff were in child nutrition. They were being paid $11.80 per hour. And currently, we're still not where we need to be, but the minimum is $17 an hour, significant increase as far as percent. If you look at the rate of increase in meal prices, not begun to catch up with that. And again, I believe once the board has a proposed budget, there'll be I believe it's a $17.50 or 4% minimum in the proposed budget. And if that comes to fruition, that continues that gap, if you will. And finally, and Mr. Lukey, you can correct me, but those prescribed or targeted percents for what food and labor costs should be, I don't know if those are regularly assessed by the federal government, so I'm not sure how stale those targets are.
Those are industry best standards for operating. The government does not audit those. They just say that the school system is responsible for the cost in the event that the cost can't be covered by revenues coming in.
Thank you. I know some people had some additional questions and some follow-ups. Ms. Dunsofsky, you haven't asked a question yet. Would you like to go now, or do you want me to come back to you? All right. Mr. Hershey and Dr. Ring.
Just very quickly, when you talked about the regional operations and you said on a campus, there's a lot of schools in Raleigh that are relatively close together, particularly in my district. What's the area range where you looked at potentially changing the structure of operations? Was it just on a campus, or was it within a mile?
All of the different scenarios we looked at were primarily shared campus schools, with I think one or two exceptions where the schools were in very close proximity. I would say within maybe a half mile. But keep in mind, we need a vehicle and we need a person to drive the vehicle. So we already candidly operate more than 20 transport locations. So we have a fleet of vehicles, but we have dedicated drivers, and it is there's it's a loss to operate that way. So we didn't get too far off of our paradigm that we operate within because we already know what the outcome is.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Ng?
Yes, I'm looking at the chart that was provided for the comparison of meal prices between different counties, and I'm having a hard time understanding the variability of the prices as well as I can't even find a comparable in terms of the percentage of CEP that makes sense to me, to even kind of look at how does other counties make it work? That's kind of my essential question.
So again, some of it depends on food choices. Like I said, we can change the food that we offer and pull out some costs that way. We could do that. But a lot of these school districts that are represented here, I think it's important to look at. Johnston County, 43 out of 48 of their schools are on CEP. They've got a lot of students that are directly certified. You get $4.35 to $4.37 a meal. That's a little different than our $3.25 plus our 50 cents, right? Chatham is already at $4, so they're 50 to 75 cents above us this current school year, but they don't have any CEP schools. And so you can look at the CEP in comparison to the price and kind of see there's this like correlating factor, I think, in how you leverage CEP to benefit your district.
Right. You can lower the price or make your prices lower based on the CEP. But yeah, I just have a hard time looking at it. I can't find a comparable to Wake County.
Yeah.
So Dr. Ng, to add to that, and I think Mrs. Lucas said it, there's going to be so much variability among those districts. When you talk about the meal quality and what that costs, how you prepare the meals. The way we prepare meals here in Wake is more about steamers and warming meals versus other places that may do something that's different. So differences in wages that employees will have. All that's going to make a huge difference in terms of what the profitability will be, because you can charge the same, but if the costs are higher or lower, that's going to determine what that may be. So it's I don't know if you could find a comparison. This is just kind of give you an idea of what they charge, but a lot more is involved in it.
Thank you for that, Chuck.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes. And again, thank you very much, Ms. DeLuca, for all the work that you've done. You have been an amazing advocate and been very patient with all of my requests for 10 years, which I appreciate. And of course, I'm glad to see that we finally got CEP off the ground. And I echo the chair's perspective that there is a whole lot more we could discuss here. I think this is an area where I only fully understand it because I've spent a lot of time with you, but I do think it's probably one of the most complicated things for the district, for the board to understand, because it does operate the way it does. And thank you, Mr. Nieder. I didn't have to ask a question for him to tell you where we were, because that was my biggest question. Because when I met with you last year, Mr. DeLuca, one of the things that you talked about, which I think is important for the board to know, because I did vote against the price increase last year, and I spoke to CNS workers when I was in the schools after I talked to you, is it is a direct correlation. And I understood that when I made the vote, but I do think it's important that everybody knows that when I made the vote to not increase the price, I also understood the impact that I was increasing salaries. And you've said it, but I think it's just more important for us to keep articulating the decision we make to pay our employees directly impacts you all as an enterprise. And the other side of that is it also directs our families. And as I was listening coming in, I do have one question, because I wasn't sure if I heard you correctly when you talked about the regionalization. And again, you added just now that that doesn't include a driver, but it sounded like you were looking at potential attrition rates, because that was my first question, is what does this mean for staffing? Did I hear you correctly? Of course, I was in the car trying to listen.
Yeah, so in that redesign, that regionalization, in order for us to launch that, we felt it was necessary to restructure the positions within our school-based operations, which means regrading and things of that nature. So in order to launch the regionalization, we would need to have this restructure completed, because we need to compensate the managers with regional oversight at a higher level. We also had built in some things that we felt for quite some time were necessary in terms of recognizing some other positions. So through attrition means that we would need to launch that as staff changed, or if there was an opportunity that created say a promotion for staff, that might allow us to move things along a little bit more quickly because the positions would be desirable to have.
Okay. Thank you. And that question was important for me to think about what my vote is next week around making sure it's also important these staff don't lose jobs. So thank you for answering that question. And then a question, Mr.
Yes.
Chair, for next week is, and again, I bring this up every year, so you're not going to be surprised, is since we're going to have a deeper conversation, I'm also curious, again, I know that you all have put forth a lot of effort to Mrs. Rice's point of trying to get families signed up. I know we've tried to get our principals on board to do this. So my follow-up question is, for next week, I'm curious about have we seen an increase in angel funds that are supporting students at our schools who, two, one, like me, I would forget to take my daughter's account when she was in school, but the second piece of that is for families. Again, I've been very transparent about this as growing up in a house where my mom just didn't want to disclose it for all of her own personal reasons, which I definitely was eligible now that I look back. But I know that there are lots of reasons why families aren't. So I'm curious, are we seeing an increase in our angel fund? I'm not getting as many calls about kids not getting their lunch, but I am still getting the calls about kids not getting their lunch. So if you could add an update on that next week or someone, that would be great. Thank you.
All right, then, if there are no other questions, we still have a couple of significant items on our work session agenda. So, Mr. Luca, Mr. Strickland, I think you've heard a lot from the board. I hope this was helpful. We appreciate all the information. Thank you. All right, next up, we have the WCPSS 25-26 enrollment plan. It seems early. It seems earlier every year, doesn't it? But this is the initial planning discussion about how we look to manage our growth, taking a multi-year approach. So I see Mr. Carrozza, I see Ms. Poyen, and once they are ready and the presentation is up and ready to go, you can take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chair Hegarty, Vice Chair Johnson Hostler, Superintendent Taylor, and all of our board members, thank you for this opportunity to start the discussion. As you'll recall, this time of year, we're simply saying which new schools are opening, what other factors do you want us to consider as we continue our work in developing the recommendations. So we're already talking about 25-26. Specific to today's session, we really want to make sure we focus on reviewing those discussion topics that are related to the enrollment planning process. So as Mr. Luca said, bear with me if some of this is repetitive. It's just to ensure that the whole story and sequence of events is well known. Second, really to seek guidance from you. We know we need to fill our new schools that are opening, but are there other areas of significance that the board would like to direct staff to make sure we include in this year's plan? And then, of course, to share a proposed timeline to make sure we can have success as early as possible. Here you're seeing a brief review of some of how our work connects with the strategic plan. Here we're partnering with our communications department and other partner agencies so that we can leverage our district communication structures better and so that we can continuously improve our community engagement activities. On this slide, you'll see where we more directly have very specific alignments to the aims here for differentiating our resource allocation, specifically as we evaluate our school choice planning and assignment programs, and of course partnering with transportation to make sure that we're incorporating bus routing in our student assignment decisions. Separate from that, my favorite slide, no, just kidding. My regular slide, our work is always anchored in policy, and the policy that drives this work is Board Policy 4150. As a reminder, there are 4 core pillars that guide our work. Those are student achievement, stability, proximity, and operational efficiency. And we talk about this every opportunity that we have. None of these are in any particular order or sequence, but staff is asked to evaluate each of them when making recommendations. So while one may have a higher, let's say, lens of priority and a particular recommendation, there's not one particular pillar that is necessarily more important than the others. In addition, in policy, because these terms are relatively native terms to our language, a lot of families or individuals will have their own personal definitions of how they use these words and language. These terms for us, as far as pillars are concerned from a policy perspective, have very specific definitions. And so we just pause here to remind you that for student achievement, it's that to the extent practicable, why we picked that word, student populations at each school will provide an optimal opportunity for academic success for all students, and there are a few sub-bullets to this particular description. For stability, it really talks about those rising 5th, 8th, and 12th grade students that are impacted by reassignment decisions, and ensuring that their siblings have at least 1 year to be able to join them if they're impacted by reassignment. We will clarify each year's enrollment plan has its own specific set of stability rules that quite often are more generous than this bare minimum. For proximity, it is to the extent practicable to make sure that base school assignments are within a reasonable distance of the student's home. And so that gets interpreted in lots of different ways throughout the county based on all the different infrastructure components that we have. And then for operational efficiency, along with our optimization of our school facility use, it also includes our use of transportation resources. So today we're going to just, as quickly as we can, walk you through a few discussion topics and then really get to that point where we're having some dialogue about what else should be included. So specifically, we'll talk about our public engagement progress, but we won't belabor this point. We're coming back in June with a much more detailed review of all the feedback we've received through our process. We'll talk about what we know about the capital improvement plan as of today, and we'll just quickly review our crowding situation and then talk about our school choice options, and of course end with a recommended timeline for our planning work. So let's dive in. Before we get too deep in, I always want to take my opportunity to make sure families know where to go to find information. This website was launched in March in response to a lot of the feedback we received. We actually made a point to come talk with you in March about this new website and to let you know how we were taking feedback from previous enrollment plans to improve our public engagement process. This website has been regularly updated since March, so if you only visited it back in March, please visit it now. We've been adding all kinds of resources and will continue to do so throughout the assignment planning process. As I mentioned, we'll talk to you in a more deep way about what we've been doing for public engagement, but I just want to give you a couple of touch points. We have actually wrapped up our in-person activities, and we're now just in the process of evaluating all the feedback we've received. Lots of really rich conversations. Last year, you heard me use the term because we were trying to get resources gathered together. You heard me say curated resources was my term for last year. This year, it's really lived experience. Our families are really rolling up their sleeves and really explaining to us how assignment decisions impact their families, and that information has just really broadened and enriched our planning process. And so we're very thankful for that and want to keep pushing on that. We are scheduled to have 2 more virtual sessions. That was an add-on to improve our outreach. Those will actually be hosted tomorrow and Thursday. Sign up for tomorrow's session will close at noon tomorrow, and then sign up for the session on Thursday will close at noon on Thursday. Families will get that blast email, but if anyone's listening, feel free to just go directly to the assignment planning website and register, and we'll get you the link to the session. Once we get through this phase, or this week really, we'll start really diving into that updating of our website. We've been continuously doing it since March, but we'll add even more information as we continue to assess our frequently asked questions. Some sessions generate a lot of questions that are really specific to assignment planning, and those are relatively easy for us to pull together. Others really generate a lot of questions that are site or grade level specific. By way of example, the Felton Grove High School session, a lot of questions about academic programs, athletic programs, extracurricular activities. So I really want to say thank you to our partners in academics and athletics because they helped us to gather all that information, and we have updated a very specific portion of the website with those questions. So if families haven't revisited, there's quite a bit of information there now. We'll come back to you in June to give you a full update, full summary of all of the information that we've received and feedback that we've received. And we'll also use that information to determine which types of focus groups we want to conduct this year to, again, continue to dig deeper into and get richer information from families as we plan. The capital improvement plan, all of this should be reviewed for you at this point. So what you'll see here is just a quick reminder that the enrollment planning process for the annual portion of the process really kicks off with our forecast, which was shared in February. And as you can see, the revision shows that we're getting it pretty good in the near years, but the out years are still a bit, changing for us. So this year there's a much more aggressive growth rate that's shown in the out years. And so just information for us to share. Here I want to pause for just a moment. This is a new map. You haven't seen this map before. We've been working really hard to take that 160,000 or whatever it is and really show where that growth is projected to occur throughout the county. So this data is completely aligned to the forecast. The arrows that are the sort of blue color that are pointing in the upward direction represent areas that are expected to have growth in enrollment or increases in total student membership over the next 10 years. Some areas may be surprising, some may be well-known. If it's a red arrow or maroon arrow from your perspective and it's pointing in the downward direction, those would reflect areas that are expected to show.
Where are those on this thing?
Those tend to be very small. I can say in a national context, Glenn and I were fortunate enough to join Dr. Lane at a conference this past week, and it was interesting. Major districts throughout the county, I said, who's still experiencing growth? And I was the only person who raised my hand, right? Who's still opening new schools? I was one of 2 districts that was raising my hand, and we're talking large districts. So we're still doing good work. And this is amazing for us. We're still on the upswing. I don't know when or if it will ever end, and that's okay. Progress is wonderful. But hopefully this helps people to understand where this growth is coming. As we talk with families, we also say this is really helpful for us as we look at the next series of slides when we look at projected crowding and existing school sites. Maybe we have school sites in these areas that are already in the right place, ready to accept this growth. And maybe in some areas we don't. And that's why we continuously have our conversations. All right. So your capital improvement plan was recently updated. This reflects, it's my sort of simplified version of that executive summary that you approved recently. I do remind families and all that are looking, this specifically talks about new schools that are projected to open. We don't capture renovations on this slide, but those are, of course, happening as well. And so what you'll see here is that this slide reflects that Woods Creek is still on track. Baucom is continuing to use that facility for the rest of this school year, and then they'll start to make their way onto their renovated campus so that Woods Creek can open as its own school. You've already approved an assignment area for that school, thank you, so that one is done. The next group, this is the group that we're planning for with this cycle of the enrollment plan. So for the 25-26 school year, based on the updates you've recently received, we're now working to open 3 elementary schools and 1 high school. You'll also notice here in the lower portion, the out years, there have been some changes and updates to this portion of the plan. We're continuing to monitor those and partner with our colleagues in facilities design and construction so that any planning recommendations keep in mind these future school sites as well. And I say that to indicate if they're close by each other, we don't want to assign students into a new school and then 2 years later assign them into a newer school. We want to make sure we're mindful of what those long-term impacts might be. And you'll hear us talk about those when the recommendations are finalized. Here's just to help everybody visualize where they're physically located in the district. So Woods Creek is located in the sort of apex portion of Apex Holly Springs area of the district. The blue circles that I've highlighted here or displayed here will show that growth the new schools that are opening for the 25-26 school year. So we definitely will be including recommendations for assignment areas for these 4 campuses. And then here are those that were in the out years, and you can see how they're distributed across the county. I will make note that on the far right of your screen, where it's more of an oval shape instead of a circle, we're still working to determine the specific site for the Eastern Area Elementary School, and that just gives that freedom to say it'll be somewhere in there. So then the next thing we think about, just from an operational efficiency standpoint, are our capped and crowded schools. This, again, is just a review of information you've known for a while as you made these approvals in February of this year. Although we were able to successfully take 3 elementary schools off the list, we still have 17 that are designated as capped. I take every opportunity to make a distinction between the noun capped and the verb capping. Not all of our capped schools have hit their cap. So it's always best for families to reach out directly to their base assigned school. It is possible that families can still be served. However, at least 4 of the schools on this list are already operating on a multi-track year-round calendar. That's that MTYR designation that you see to the right of the schools. This then is a quick display of the elementary school projected crowding for 24-25. Again, the enrollment forecast helps us to figure out how many students we think we're going to have, and then we distribute them across the schools that are already in existence. The darker the red or orange color, the more likely it is over 110% crowded. The orange is 100 to 110, the yellow is 90 to 100, and the light gray color or background color would be at or below 90% crowded for projections. So again, you've seen these a couple of times now, but they were originally presented to you in March.
And I just want to remind you, the K-3 class size legislation does impact the crowding in our elementary schools.
In particular.
And just a note of appreciation, because I know we've used these maps before, but one of the things that if you pay attention on this one, I know the legend's kind of small, you can see where they've added, for example, the future schools. So before we'll have areas that look very, very crowded, but you can see we have a school coming online soon, hopefully, to address that.
And for those that are looking with your Zoom features, those would be the diamond shapes.
Yeah, I had to get down there.
Here we see a listing of our current designated capped middle schools and high schools. We didn't make any progress in this area. We're still doing some work in these areas, but we do have 2 schools on these lists that are also designated as feeder pattern cap. So that's just a reminder that absolute worst case scenario, a kindergartner could already be on the wait list for one of those schools if the total number of kindergartners registered already exceeds what could fit in the 9th grade or 6th grade, respectively, for these campuses. So we would like to get less of those. Here you see the projected crowding for the middle schools. This one's getting a little bit better throughout the district. We talked about this quite regularly. We're getting close. They're just not all quite in the right regions. So we still have at least one school that's projected to be over 110% crowded and a handful that are projected to be between 100 and 110. We do have a middle school coming in the future. It won't be part of the 25-26 enrollment plan that could address the darkest of red area that you see on the map, but we still have a little bit of work to do to balance the enrollment across our middle schools. And at the high schools, similar to the middle schools, it's getting a little bit more balanced. You can see Apex Friendship is the school that's designated with the most significant crowding on this map, and we do have a high school coming in this region that can hopefully address some of those concerns. All right. And then another area that we focus on in our school choice planning and assignment division is the school choice option element. We are a district that has a robust set of choices for families. Those do come sometimes with things that support our goals. And so you'll see that we're going to continue to evaluate those existing school application areas to make sure that those recommendations continue to align with our initiatives and also Board Policy 4150 and, of course, our strategic plan. Specifically, we want to make sure that the application choices that are available to families continue to support the Magnet objectives of reducing high concentrations of poverty and promoting integration and diversity. In addition, we want to make sure that we're improving our operational efficiency by maximizing the use of our school facilities and improving transportation efficiency. So wherever possible, we may have additional recommendations that aren't specifically related to the opening of a new school that are aligned with these types of work areas.
And yes, those are our nationally recognized magnet programs we're talking about.
Yes. So before we get to questions and additional items for discussion, we just want to make sure that we're supporting the development of the 25-26 plan. So we're proposing the following timeline, such that today represents May 7th. We're having our initial conversation with you to seek some additional guidance. After this conversation, we'll continue to do our outreach with the public. We'll also continue to start drafting the initial draft of the 25-26 plan. We want to come back to you in June on the 18th at work session with an update on the progress of all of our public engagement efforts to date. We also then will continue after that session to work on the final recommendations that will be included in that initial draft. Our goal is to have for you on September 3rd, and I note this because this is one session earlier. With 4 schools opening, we thought it would be best to give families sufficient time to review and respond to any recommendations that are included. In addition, if you'll recall, we're adding back in an in-person event. We want to make sure there's sufficient time for families to be notified and be able to participate in that event. So we are recommending that we come to you at the September 3rd work session with that set of initial recommendations. That would allow us about 2 extra weeks roughly before we come back to you in October, which will give us a little bit more breathing room to actually evaluate the feedback, so that by the time we would come to you on October 15th, not only would we review the feedback with you and summarize what we're hearing from families, if there are any adjustments that need to be made, we would include those at that time as well based on that feedback. Finally, you would host a public hearing at a date to be determined by the board per your policies and requirements. And we would like to come to you on November 19th as our schedule to bring to you a final draft of recommendations for review and ultimate approval. This would put us just before the Thanksgiving break. So we've heard a lot of positive feedback from families that if we can get these decisions to them sooner, it gives them more time to understand the impacts on their family, and it allows us to more rapidly get them participating in stability transfer processes if they're eligible, so that they can know what that assignment's going to look like before they break for the winter holiday. So this supports that continued movement that we've made over the last couple of years to get that decision made as early as possible. And this would allow schools and staff roughly 6 to 8 months to be able to have those decisions made before opening school. And with that, we're subject to your questions.
All right. Does the board have any questions or comments related to the proposed enrollment plan or the timeline? Dr. A?
Thank you so much for reviewing this. I think everybody needs to have a refresher anyway. But certainly with this coming cycle, we're talking about all these new schools that are coming on board, and so it's going to have a lot more impact than before. And one of the things I appreciate, we mentioned about lived experience and some of the things that we've kind of come across from our reviews of these assignments is how the real life traffic patterns of driving a child, or even just having bus transportation to school, has a major impact that we we only see it kind of like how the distance of a crow flies, but when you're talking about real life traffic going on the road, driving from point A to point B, that makes a big impact on whether a school is easily accessible.
And if I may, because of the way that we've changed our engagement process and we're having so much more input on the early ends, that actually gives us time to not only use GIS technology, but to physically get in a car at 8 o'clock in the morning and go drive that route, or whatever the school times would be, so we can have a full understanding of what that really does look and feel like for families. And that has been very, very helpful for us, and being able to, even if we can't make an adjustment, we can at least share with you how that truly is. So that lived experience has been really, really helpful for us. So thank you for supporting that.
All right. Further questions? Ms. Mahaffey?
Well, and I appreciate Dr. Ng's question because that knocked off one of mine, so thank you. And I did see that in the FAQs, especially for the high school, where we're going to eventually have student drivers. I know that's a huge concern for parents. When we talk about the feeder pattern cap, how soon do families know with this, potential kindergartner that may be subject to a high school cap? How soon do we inform families if their student may be impacted by that feeder pattern cap so they can make choices, and if they decide they want to look at a magnet program or not worry about that, that they can make that informed decision? Is that a conversation with their data manager, or is that just something that we keep track of internally?
So there's two ways. The sort of flat way, the least desirable way, is you can look in the address lookup tool. You can see that your address is assigned to that school, and it'll describe that it's a school that has a feeder pattern cap, which means you're on alert. And then I'll let Glenn kind of embellish or add.
We don't have a notification process for parents until they get to if it's a high school, the 8th grade year, because a lot can change between kindergarten and 8th grade, and we're trying not to increase their anxiety.
Yeah.
So we always put parents unaware that there is a chance you could be capped, but as students move in and out of the district in that particular base attendance area, students will move up that list. I don't want to say it's common for a kindergartner to get capped out from the beginning, but
that's why I said hypothetically.
Yeah.
And I would say realistically, if there's a kindergarten student on it, by the time, if they stay with us, they won't be on it. It'll be the newer resident that comes in 5th or 6th grade, but yes.
But it certainly can be something that staff can look into, that if there's historical data that shows that you're getting capped out in 3rd or 4th grade, and that's sticking for quite some time, that we may want to start alerting parents earlier. We also do a good job, or student assignment does a good job of notifying parents that being on a cap list doesn't prevent you from exercising other choice options around the district. So if you get a magnet application approved, it does not take you off of your capped wait list. So parents can still exercise choice in the meantime.
I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? I know this is not the last time we'll be seeing this topic. Got a lot of work ahead of us, but thanks for bringing it to us this early.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right. Take a moment of transition. I mean, I think that's, we do have a conversation about next the superintendent's proposed 2024 budget. This will be, opportunity just to get any clarifications, any last questions before it comes to our agenda tonight. If we do finish our work session agenda ahead of schedule, I would like to entertain the motion of going ahead and going into our closed session early so that we can go ahead and knock out some of those important issues on the front end of our meeting tonight. Okay? All right then. So we have our department and our department staff here, Terry Kimsey, Trish Posey, and David Nieder. Does anyone want to begin, or let's take a look and see. We have the policy. David, why don't you start with the policy on the fund balance?
Yes. The policy on your fund balance is policy 8101, and it speaks to primarily two provisions within the policy. The first is a target for how much the unassigned or undesignated fund balance should accumulate to, and that's not what we'll be talking about primarily today. What we'll be asking you to do in your board meeting prior to your consideration of approval of a proposed budget is to waive another portion of that same policy. That other portion directs that the board should not put in more than 50% of an unassigned fund balance into balancing a subsequent year's budget. And as I'll share with you when I present that action item, that the amount of fund balance that is targeted to be in the board's proposed budget is $32.4 million, and the actual unassigned fund balance as of June 30th, 2023 was $52.6 million. So the amount being recommended to include in the proposed budget is in excess of that 50%, and it actually is 61.6%. That said, and I'll share again this at the board meeting, staff is comfortable in recommending that to the board. And in recent times, as we've gone through the pandemic, and even I think prior to the pandemic, and I know during times of the Great Recession, we recommended this to the board. So that's a little background on that.
All right. So does anybody have any questions about the proposed waiver policy that'll be coming up before we vote on it? Again, I think Mr. Nieder, you explained this well, and we've done this before. It should be pretty common to most folks. All right. So if we take a look here, you'll see a worksheet in Assembly that should have the adjustments to the superintendent's proposed budget that the board discussed and agreed to at our last work session. And so this will form the basis for our board's proposed budget, which we'll send to the county commission for our request for appropriation of local funds. So I want to make sure before we get into the general meeting tonight, everyone's had a chance to look at this, understands it. If there's any questions anybody has about what's in it or anything like that, now's the opportunity. I'll give everyone a moment. You'll see this does include the changes that we're making to the superintendent's budget were the ones that were proposed in option 2. of the different scenarios that Mr. Nieder had brought to us. And all of these are heavily focused on increasing compensation for our staff. In addition, it includes a couple of other minor changes that were proposed by members, and it includes some cuts that Dr. Ng had proposed as well that you see put in here. HR positions, and then also an academic achievement position. And just giving everyone any final chances for any final questions or comments. Ms. Edmonds, and then Mr. Nieder, if you have some comments.
So I started to add this to my board member comments that I'll make tonight at 5:30, but I'm going to go ahead and say it now. I want to thank the staff for all of the extra time that has been required as we did an extra work session, more sets of questions. I know that we all know that that required a lot more of your staff time, and I just want to thank you for all of that very much.
Thank you, Ms. Edmonds. You know, this was a very different budget process than those we've been through recently, maybe not different from ones that have preceded that. Ms. Johnson-Hosler could tell us some more stories. But if you've been to Assembly and you've seen the presentation for tonight, you know everything will be uploaded and ready to go. All right. Let me find one more document. I was anticipating a little more comment, if not discussion. We're good to go. I think,
Yeah, that's what
Mr. Reggie sounds good to go. I'm not going to oversell
Let's just go ahead and go to closed
it.
session. Yeah, don't push it.
I will say that I think if you look at the work that was done, you know, there were a lot of meaningful and impactful changes, but I think a lot of these changes are changes that were reflected by the feedback that we all received throughout the district, both from teachers, parents, people in the community, and it's glad to see that we could all come together, and no matter if it was pay for bus drivers or flag football, we found a way to put those concerns into our proposal. So I will tell you, I thought it was a good discussion that we had at our last meeting. I know the unscheduled meetings can be difficult for some people. I appreciate you all giving your time, and all the work everyone put in came very prepared. And I thought that was a great way to put a budget proposal together. So thank you for your questions. Thank you for your input. Mr. Nieder, any final comments?
Yes, if I could just share, I will not be sharing tonight unless the board would like me to, kind of next steps after tonight, but I would like if the board would entertain maybe 5 minutes to share next steps that will take place, if that is all right.
I think so. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So tonight we will ask your consideration of approval of the waiver of fund balance, as well as your consideration of approval of your board's proposed budget. As you're aware, the county manager presented a budget, I believe yesterday, to the commissioners, and the commissioners will have a series of work sessions, just as this board did, discussing the budget. In the past, recent past, the commissioners have approved the final budget, usually at their first June meeting. So we'll know that. That said, I do not believe it's likely that we'll have a state budget by early June. And until the state budget is known, we won't be in a position to have final recommendations to reconcile the board's proposed budget against the county's budget against the state's budget. So in June, we would ask the board to adopt an interim budget, which will allow the board and the district to continue to operate effective July 1 under kind of a going concern, if you will, not putting in place any changes. And then once the state's budget is known, we'll have the opportunity to come back to the board to do that reconciliation, make recommendations for it, and a major component of that reconciliation will be recommendations for final salary schedules for 2024-2025. And I want to make sure everyone understands that even though those decisions may not be made until several months into the new fiscal year, any compensation changes would be retroactive back to July 1st. So employees would effectively be made whole, and those compensation changes will be ultimately realized as of July 1st. And then just maybe a couple other comments. I believe the board will have a joint virtual meeting this week with the commissioners.
That has actually been canceled.
I am sorry, my apologies. And then I'll leave it at that. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Chair.
Well, we will have time for additional planning for that meeting, and we will have the benefit, knock on wood, of an approved budget, which we can take into that meeting. All right, then? All right, well, we could go and recap what's in the budget, but, Sam.
Motion to go into close.
Motion to close session. Just one other thing for people's expectations. Directly related to the budget, but separate from the budget, remember that our last meeting, we did talk about the pay and efficiency study. And so just to be, so no one is surprised, I expect there will be some discussion coming on that tonight as well. So if anyone has any questions or thoughts on that, just be prepared. I don't want to surprise anybody when that comes up, okay? All right, Sam, I believe you had a motion?
Motion to go into closed session for the reasons cited by Chris Haggerty.
How about the reasons stated in the
There you go.
online document?
We can do that.
Statutory reasons. All right, a motion by Mr. Hershey to move into closed session, second by Vice Chair Johnson Hostler. All in favor of moving into closed session, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, we will go into closed session. The work session is agended. We'll give the room a few moments to clear.